Welcome to Veterans Connected, where maintenance and reliability expert and military veteran Eric Bevevino connects with fellow veterans in industry during each episode, where they exchange their experiences and discuss the transition from the military to industry and the paths and resources that led them to where they are today. The Veterans Connected podcast is proudly produced by the industry's leading network and learning community, Mobius Connect. Eric, over to you.
Hi, I'm Eric Bevevino, host of the Mobius Connect podcast, focused on connecting military veterans to the maintenance and reliability community. My aim here is to bridge the understanding gap between the military and civilian worlds, thereby improving the veteran transition journey and ultimately providing hope and a helping hand to any of our brothers and sisters out there struggling to find their way. We'll do this by interviewing veterans who have successfully made it through. For this session, we've chosen to interview one such Army veteran, Clark G. Smith, whose fascinating and patriotic story is a must listen for anyone interested in joining us on this mission. Hey, Clark, thanks for joining us. How you doing today?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. Season 2, episode 2. So,
Cool.
if you believe in numbers and luck, go play 22 on roulette today, and you might be a lucky winner. So our listeners may be interested to know that Clark and I have known each other for quite some time. I don't know. It's probably well over 20 years. 92. Yeah, that's right.
A lieutenant junior grade.
Yeah. So I was right out of the military, second year in the corporate world, working for Castrol, and Clark came in, and that's where we met. So we've known each other for a long time. Clark is our first Vietnam veteran on the podcast, not our first Army veteran. We've had a lot of Army veterans, but our first Vietnam veteran on the podcast. So this should be I hope it will be very interesting for everybody. Clark's got a ton of stories, an incredible memory, and did some pretty amazing stuff over in Vietnam, and we're going to hear about some of that today. So why don't we start, Clark, with who you are and what you're doing today? Like what's your job in the maintenance and reliability? Then we'll dial back to where you grew up, what your influences were growing up, and all that type of stuff.
All right. Well, I'm working for, should I tell them what company or just?
Yeah, that's fine. It's free advertising for them. Yeah.
All right. I'm working for a company named Bureau Veritas. They acquired a company that I worked for about 25 years now. I started with them in 1983, and then they closed the lab out from under me in 1991, and I went away for 15 years and worked for a major oil company, and then I came back. And I've been working for them ever since. And we do lubricant analysis and lubrication, fuels, coolants, all of that stuff. And I do mainly lubricants. I work from home. It's very nice and quiet. Sometimes when I have the music playing and people call, they wonder where they've called. But it's one of those things. I enjoy it. I've became aware of oil analysis when I was in the military, because in the aircraft we used to have to send samples of the gearboxes every 25 hours down to Vung Tau in Vietnam, and they ran them. And a funny story with that, one day we were sitting there just cooling our heels. We had a mission where we were flying what they referred to as ash and trash, and we're waiting for our next job, and we're sitting there under the tower, and the tower calls us on the radio and says, "Your operations people want to talk to you." Okay, fine. So we got on the radio, and we're sitting there, and operations says, "Where are you?" And it was broken, so we said, "All right, this isn't going to work." So we untied the blades, went out and flew around the patch at about 1,100 feet. We got back on the horn with operations, and they said, "Where are you?" And we told them we're about 1,100 feet. They said, "Oh, that's probably not a good idea." And of course we asked why. And the answer why the answer why was because the oil analysis had come back that there was a problem in the main transmission. And of course, the main transmission is connected to that big fan, which keeps the pilots and the crew cool. And if that stops, it's not good. And so the discussion became at that point, would it be better to land again and wait for them to send the hook to come and get us, or try to fly back? So we figured, all right, we'll try to fly back. And then the discussion was, do we fly back at high altitude or very low altitude, trying to decide whether it's better, because if the main transmission freezes, you can't auto rotate. So is it better to fall, from thousands of feet, or fall but from just maybe a few hundred? And as it worked out, we got all the way back and landed, all that, and came to find out 2 days later that the people down at Bunkhouse screwed up, and it was somebody else's transmission, not mine.
Oh my!
Oh, it was a wonderful thing.
Did you get to take a look at the transmission? I mean, did you go peek into it?
We got in under there. What we did first is we landed the airplane and got in the hellhole, and they have what they refer to as chip detectors, which is basically a magnetic plug with an electrical connection. And if you get enough metallic chips on there, it'll complete the circuit. The light comes on. Well, I got in there and pulled the chip detector out. It was clean. All right, put it back in. Okay. And then the fun with the chip detectors is there's a check valve in there. So when you pull the chip detector out, it blocks things off so the oil doesn't leak all over the place. But sometimes the check valve doesn't close. And when the check valve doesn't close, then you get covered with hot oil. It's tons of fun.
Interesting. Well, that transmission is pretty complicated, right? Bunch of gears and all sorts. Yeah.
And when I got out of, I went to school after I got out of the military, and I worked for Sikorsky Aircraft for about 7 years, and I worked in the testing end of things, and we had testing cells where we tested transmissions and different gearboxes and all that stuff, and it was very interesting. And they hadn't improved the chip detectors or that check valve one iota in the time that I was out. And every once in a while, the thing would hang up, and you get gallons of oil sitting on the floor, and it's like, oh, okay, this is uncool. But it happens. But that's how I became aware of oil analysis, was in the military.
Right. So you've touched it on. So you do the analysis now and do sort of the comments, right? The human element of oil analysis,
data,
right?
And I decide if the data is good or bad, or if the data is indicating a problem, and then I will make comments on that and suggest courses of action and things like that, and away it goes. I do I average about 300 samples a day. So you don't spend a lot of time doing it, but by trade, I'm a licensed airframe and power plants mechanic. So, like most of the folks that I work with really don't have a lot of mechanical experience. But for me, I do have a lot. And it helps. And it helps when I talk to the customers about problems. They're impressed. And in the past, we used to send what we referred to as data analysts to overhaul schools. So if you've been to an overhaul school for a piece of equipment that you're talking to a customer about right then and there, that enhances their comfort in the whole thing, because many times they haven't even been to these overhaul schools, and if you've been to that, it's a good thing for them. It makes them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, well, and either on purpose or accidentally, I mean, you touch on something that many people coming out of the military may have, right? Especially if they're in
Oh yeah,
maintenance positions on aircraft or rolling stock, Humvees, tanks, whatever, jet planes. And we have had some submariners, we had some aircraft maintenance folks here on the podcast, fixed wing, and now you were a helicopter crew chief in Vietnam, is that right?
yes, yes. And helicopters are an accident waiting for a time and place to happen. Anybody that's flown in them long enough will tell you that.
It happened to be the symbol of Vietnam and the way that a lot
Oh,
of wars
I've
are
had
fought today, right?
funny thing. I was supposed to be there for a fixed period of time, and I was supposed to leave, and then they extended me because of the mission we were performing, and we're flying along, fat, dumb, and happy, and operations calls, and they said, "Hey, you want to go home?" I said, "Of course I want to go home. What the hell? I don't want to be here. You know,
Sorry.
I've been here already for almost a year. You know, it's been amusing, but I'm done." And they said, "Well, you can go home today if you can get back and clear the fire base." So aircraft commander says, "Well, you want to go?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So we turned for home, and the engine fails. We had to make a precautionary landing. We landed in a nice wide open rice paddy. There, got out, standing in mud up to our knees, and the aircraft commander says, "We can have them send another ship out to just get you, and then we'll get the heavy lift stuff out to come and get the airplane." And I said, "No," I said, "by the time we get that all done, it'll be too late anyway." So I stood around until the Chinook came, and we rigged the ship and we hooked it back. And I spent an extra night in Vietnam, so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, interesting stuff, Clark. I mean, you said a lot in the first 10 minutes of the interview here, so I just want to capture. We've had another oil analysis person, though, in a different capacity on the show. Brian Debshaw has been on the show, and
Oh, I
he's
know Brian. Yeah,
yeah, right. Brian, Air
Colonel
Force,
Colonel Debshaw.
right, at Polaris, right. So
Yes.
so I think your perspective and how it can help people coming out of the military today is they may not even they may have seen oil analysis, but they don't know necessarily where it goes, what sort of value they may have as being through these schools, overhaul schools, maintenance, understanding, providing the insight as to like why is it important to pay attention to iron filings in your oil analysis, and what could it mean and what parts and stuff like that. So I think this is quite helpful when people folks coming out of the service are trying to assess their worth and what they can do. And a lot of people are saying, well, you know you're not qualified to do anything in the civilian world. That's a load of crap, right? There's all kinds of things in addition to leading people, which everybody generally comes out with, at least in small part, maybe even in large part. But this time you're an example of uh, using that experience to your benefit in the maintenance and reliability world. So that's good. So before you were in Vietnam, though, where did you grow up? We don't have to start like when you were five, but like when you're in high school, and like what
Well,
influences did you have? I mean, what led you to enlist? Right, you volunteered to go to Vietnam at that time, and you chose.
3 times.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, tell us the story.
So at any rate, I was born and raised in northeastern New Jersey, and my father was a World War II vet. He was born in the Netherlands, and he and my uncles were in the National Guard, and in 1939, when the federal government nationalized all the guard units, uh, they looked at things and they figured my uncles were too old, so they kicked them out. And they figured out that my father was actually had been underage. And so they gave him the option of getting out or staying in. And they offered him a few stripes and all of that. And he said, nah, to hell with it, I'll get out. Which, in retrospect, probably turned out to be a good thing. That guard unit in Paterson, New Jersey, was an infantry unit, and they hit Omaha Beach in the first wave or two, and more than 80% casualties. And my father always told me, he said, if I hadn't gotten out, you probably wouldn't be here because I'd probably be dead. But he got out, and eventually he got drafted again and into the regular army, and became actually, of all things, a telephone lineman assigned to a artillery unit. And all over France and Germany, he and his colleagues were stringing wire because back then the radios weren't secure. So when they used to string wires from the forward observers back to the artillery batteries, so they had, fire control. So that's what he did over there. Well, when I was very young, he told me about things, and he had some mementos and things that I saw. And I remember I must have been, 3 or 4 years old, and my father and I were watching TV. And my father says to me, we're just watching a cowboy movie. And I forget which one it was, but my father said to me, that's Audie Murphy. And I'm like, okay, Dad, who's Audie Murphy? Well, Audie Murphy was the most decorated soldier in World War II and a recipient of the Medal of Honor. Oh, okay. And I learned about that, like I said, very young. And then the next Medal of Honor recipient I learned about was from another movie with Alvin York and World War One. And so I'd known about that stuff, and I figured, well, there was a couple of things that drove me to enlist. Other cousins of mine had served, some at the end of the Korean War, and then a couple in Vietnam and that. And I always thought that, at some point, it was my turn to pay my portion of the bill. So that was part of the reason I enlisted. And the other reason I enlisted is I wanted to see basically if I was good enough. And as it turns out, I was. And I received awards for certain things and that, and that. And I was the honor graduate in every school. I was the honor graduate out of basic, and I was the honor graduate out of all the schools I went to. In fact, I can sit here, and if I had a camera, I've got the Army Aircraft Maintenance School Distinguished Graduate Diploma sitting right in front of me.
Oh, that's so really, when you say you wanted to figure out if you were good enough, what does that mean? Like you were as good as your elders? I mean, you had a lot of positive.
No, I wanted to figure if I was good enough just to hack it, to actually be in the military. And because I mean, there's no, you go in, there's no reason that you're going to make it for sure. I mean, you could get singled out and sent on your merry way for any number of things. The funny thing was, me being me, when I got the basic training, the first thing I did is I looked at them and I just kind of laughed to myself, and I said, they said, "You think this is funny?" I said, "To be honest, at this point, I think it's hilarious." I said, "I know what you're doing. I know why you're trying to do it." And I said, "I don't care how hard you work. You try, you can't beat me." And my drill instructors took that personally. And
Yeah, and they gave you some special treatment for that. I'm
oh
guessing.
hell yeah! I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I got if you wanted attention, that was one of the first things to do to make sure that you got all that you could handle. And for 8 weeks, they tried their damnedest and got absolutely nowhere. And it was funny. At the end, I ended up in the hospital because I got sick. I had a 104-degree fever, and I did the PT test with 104-degree fever. And then right after that, my DI threw me in a jeep and drove me to the dispensary. But when I got out of the hospital, I was there, and everything was all done. Everybody was gone except for the DIs and the CO and the first shirt and all them. And they told me, by the way, you were the honor graduate. And the honor graduate got to carry the God arm. And I said, well, why didn't you come and get me? And they said, well, we thought the powder blue pajamas would kind of clash with the motif. And I said, you people are no fun. And the CO said, he said, there's something you need to know about this. And he said, the vote was unanimous. He said, it's the first time it's ever been unanimous. And I said, were you guys smoking things that you had left over from Vietnam? And they said, no. And I said, oh. I said, because I wasn't the best at anything. And they said, well, no, you were the best at one thing, and that is you were always there for your buddies. You never let them down. If they were having a tough time, you were always there to help them. And when you had a 104-degree fever and there were guys having trouble completing the mile run, you were already done and you were running with them, cheering them on. And you had been like that from day one and never faltered. And as much as we tried to to make things difficult with you, you actually volunteered for more, and that was impressive. And I said, well, it still would have been fun to be out there in my pajamas, holding the God iron. But that was the first time I was the honor graduate in anything, but it wasn't the last.
No, that's a great honor, and clearly you made an impression and a positive impression, and I think it's reinforcing the behavior of taking care of your folks, right? Your teammates and everything like that. So that probably made you feel pretty good. And then did you
Well,
go off to help? Yeah, go
the
ahead.
thing that was funny was there was a recurring question all through basic training, and that was, where did we find you? And
You
I
found
looked,
them.
yeah, that's what I told them. I said,
Right.
you remember, my service number starts with RA, not with US. I said, I found you guys. And they're like, oh God. But it was so funny. I mean, I had a great time, and there are other stories I could tell about. We had some National Guard DIs for a while, and they had one corporal. I tortured the hell out of him. He was an Italian kid from Newark, and he came to his 2 weeks of summer training out of shape, and I tortured him.
Yeah, you were 18 and fit and
Oh yeah, and I
tall
and
and
I already been
strong
there.
and all that. Yeah.
I had already been there for 5 weeks, so you start to round into shape, and I tortured this guy to the point where the senior drill instructor dragged me aside and he says, "Leave the corporal alone." I said, "What do you mean, leave him alone?" He says, "He's feeling bad," and I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, put him in this unit. He can go to Vietnam with the rest of us." And the senior drill instructor just shook his head and said, "This is an order. Leave him alone." Okay.
So that's what I have to say if I want you to stop talking, we're out to lunch or something like that.
Well,
If
it doesn't.
that's what gets your attention.
It won't help.
So did you go to helicopter maintenance school or aircraft maintenance school after that
Yeah,
then
right
before you
after
went to
that, I went
Vietnam?
down to
Yeah.
Fort Rucker, Alabama, a wonderful place, or as everybody refers to it that has ever been there, Fort Mother Rucker.
Right. Right on. Right on. And
Now they
then
renamed it, so but to everybody that's ever been there, it's never going to change. I don't give a who what they do. It's
it,
never just the same as Fort Bragg is never going to be anything else other but Fort Bragg, and Fort Benning is never going to be anything else but Fort Benning, and Fort Hood is not going to be anything else but Fort Hood. I mean, I don't give a what they do.
so were you honor graduate of aircraft maintenance? They call it aircraft or helicopter maintenance school?
Aircraft maintenance. I
Aircraft.
went to two schools there, and I was the honor graduate in both of them.
Nice. Nice. And then you shipped over across the pond,
Well,
the
no,
western pond.
first I went down to Fort Walters, Texas, to look at pilot training because by then I was in good enough shape to pass the flight physical, and I looked at that for about 2 days, and I went and found this major, and I said, just get me out of here. I said, there is no way in God's green earth that I'm going to re-up, and there's no way in God's green earth that I'm going to come here and allow you people to bust my stones for almost a year to be a helicopter pilot. Just cut my orders and send me home, and then send me to Vietnam and be done with it. And that was the end of that.
No, I don't think I heard that story before. Maybe
Oh
I
yeah,
had. I can't remember. But all right, so you were anxious to get over there and get in the fight and
well, I was
and
actually actually I was anxious to get away from all the BS.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
It's
I
like
totally get it. Yeah, totally get
this
it.
this is not doing anything productive. I mean,
You've already proven you can do push-ups and sit-ups and run
yeah,
and all that stuff.
I've
Yeah.
already done that. There's no reason to continue that foolishness. I remember one warrant officer candidate. They for 2 days they busted his butt about fingerprints on his brass, and I don't care if his fingerprints are on his brass. What I give a damn is if can he hover. Hovering a helicopter is one of the hardest things anybody has ever done, and you know it's like, can he hover? Can he fly? If he can fly, fine. If he can't fly, then weed him out and be done with him. Send him down to Fort Polk, Louisiana, to become 11 Bravo. You know, 11 Bravo, by the way, is infantryman.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I know that, but it's good for the listeners who don't know for sure. And so they were going to make you a warrant officer then, warrant officer, helicopter pilot. That was the potential
Well,
path there.
I considered that. The colonel that was in charge of the maintenance schools sent me down there. He asked me after he handed me my diploma, and is there anything I can do for you? And I told him, well, I'd been interested in flying. He said, okay. He says, I'll send you TDY down to Fort Walters, and you can take a look at it. And I went down there and I took a look at it, and I said, no.
Well, that was, I mean, you earned that opportunity through being an honor graduate. So,
Yeah.
all right. So then you shipped off, you showed up and
Oh yeah, it was a wonderful thing.
yeah, yeah.
I remember very vividly the flight over. We went the long way from Travis Air Force Base across the Pacific to Hawaii to the Philippines and then to Guam and then to Vietnam. And I was sitting next to a first lieutenant who was about to get promoted to captain. And he had been there before. And I'm sitting in the seat next to him, singing under my breath that Country Joe and the Fish song, to feel like you're fixing to die rag. And they're 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Whoopee. And I sang that.
Can't say I'm familiar, brother, but
well,
yeah, we'll go with it.
Look it up.
Yeah.
Or we should have music behind this. Then we should play that. But at any rate, the lieutenant at one point, somewhere between the Philippines and Guam, says, "You're really looking forward to this, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Well, don't worry." He said, That'll pass very quickly. Well, we got to Vietnam. We landed at Consonant, and they turned the air conditioning off. And the temperature went from probably a comfortable 75 to over 95 almost instantaneously. And we got out of the airplane and we're standing in formation on the concrete. And everybody had sweated through their uniforms at that point. And I'm sitting there and standing there next to that lieutenant. And I said, "This sucks." He says, "You think this is bad?" He says, "Wait till you actually have to do something." He says, "We're just standing here now." And he said, "I told you that enthusiasm would pass rather quickly." And I said, "I didn't know it would pass in the first, half an hour." And he goes, "Oh, you're going to love it." And I'm like, "Thank you, sir." That was funny. But I had never been so hot, and the weather, it was just hot and humid, and there was no relief from it anywhere. It was just there. I remember trying to sleep the night before. I'm sleeping under an overhead fan, and I sweated through not only the sheets, but the mattress. When I got up in the morning, the bottom of the mattress, the underside of the mattress was wet. That's how bad it was.
It sounds like Kentucky in the middle of August here,
Oh,
but
this is nothing.
hey, so you got over there, right?
Yes.
And yeah, so I just want to make sure we cover some of this too. But I would say that we probably have time for, maybe a couple stories, and the one, and you can decide which ones you relate here, but the one that struck me the most that you've told me is the one where you guys went to grab a helicopter crew that had been either shot down or maintenance malfunction or
No,
something like that.
they had an engine failure.
Engine
And
failure. Okay.
we were flying command and control at that point. We used to hang with the gunships, and a lot of times we'd fly up ahead and look at the new LZ or this or that or whatever. So we're flying along, fat, dumb, and happy, and with the gunships, and all of a sudden there's us in one gunship, and the other one is nowhere to be seen. And I remember the conversation began. Where the hell did the other gunship go? And I finally saw it. And I said, "There it is. It's down there at about 9 o'clock." And they said, "Oh, gee," we looked and it was laying on its side and all of that. I said, "Well," I said, "hold this damn thing still." And the pilot goes, "Why do you want me to hold it still?" I said, "So I can comfortably jump the hell out of here." And he says, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "It's the only way I know to get down there in between the trees." And so I jumped out of the helicopter and ran over there, and we helped them get out of there. And
How far of a jump was that, Clark? I mean,
about 30 feet.
so you jumped 30 feet, didn't get
Yeah.
hurt. Is it into
Well,
a rice paddy or what?
no, it was relatively soft ground, but it
Okay.
wasn't a rice paddy. But I had seen my senior drill instructor in basic training jump off of the barracks and do a parachute landing fall, PLF. And so I figured, well, if I try to do that, I should be okay. So I did my best imitation of that, rolled down and rolled across my shoulders and popped up. And all right, that seems to work. All the parts are still connected. And so I ran over there to help those guys. And we got them out of there, and we managed to get another airplane in there, and we loaded them up. And they told me to get in, and I said, "Well, I think I'll stay here." I said, "Because you're already overloaded." And I grabbed the other guy that was with me, and I said, "Here, we'll stay here." And they ordered us out of there. And I said, don't worry about it. I said, just tell the rest of the people up there that we're here so they don't see us running around and shoot us. I said, I don't want that because, you know, that would be uncool and my mom wouldn't like it if people shot at me. And, oh, it was so funny. But we got in there and we took them to the evac hospital. And the good part of the whole story is that about 3 weeks after that, we had to take some other people to that same evac hospital. And I got out and I found one of the nurses and I described those four guys to her. And she said, oh, yeah. She says, the two guys we released, you know, after overnight, the other two went and got evacuated eventually after a couple weeks to Japan for some other medical procedures and things like that. But they walked out of here under their own power, and I was glad to hear that.
Nice, nice. So they survived helicopter crash,
Oh yeah,
and you guys, you in particular, went out to help them out and get
oh
them
yeah.
back to safety. So
The
yeah.
one guy had a broken hip and a broken shoulder. That was the
Mm.
aircraft commander, and the other guy had broken his one arm, his upper arm, and also broke his upper leg, his femur. And but we got him out of there, and it was interesting standing up on the helicopter on its side, reaching down into the helicopter to grab them to try and
Yeah.
pick them up out of there. It's amazing the things you can do when you're motivated, and of course, I'm not the littlest guy either, and so it was fun. But we got him out of there. You know, that was the good part.
No, that's great, Clark. Yeah, it's a great story and incredible. May not have felt that super brave at the time, but certainly
Well,
anybody hearing it would feel that it was.
the
Yeah.
interesting thing was that they put me in for the Distinguished Service Cross. I didn't get it, but they put me in for it, and I thought that that was absolutely ridiculous because the Distinguished Service Cross is just one step below the Medal of Honor, and as far as I was concerned, there's no way in God's green earth that what I did was, you know, qualified for something like that. I thought that was ridiculous. And as it worked out, I was right. I didn't get it. So, you know, partially because of other political issues. And we'll leave it at that.
Well, right on. Maybe, yeah, maybe they assumed that if you didn't get that, it get downgraded to Bronze Star or whatever the next
One of the
associated
things
medal
that
was. Yeah.
one of the things that was so funny in your retirement uh, celebration from the Navy, I remember I got to talk to your uncle, who was a retired brigadier general, and I mentioned to him that I pretty much got along with all the ranks except for majors, and your uncle explained to me why majors always seem to have a problem, and I laugh like hell because I never thought somebody who had achieved, you know, that rank would ever speak about themselves in that way. It was absolutely hilarious. Uh,
So you're talking about my uncle Len, who was brigadier general in
yeah,
the Army, Len Hoke. Yeah. So yeah, rest his soul. God rest his soul. So yeah, that was a good time. Retiring, the retirement party was glad to see you there, and it was all good. Glad you got to meet him.
and you remember we sang to one of your folks there, that the woman that was the E3 pilot. We sang to her, and we had decided at that point roughly that between all of us we had seen Top Gun over 300 times.
Right on. You're right on. Yeah. Well, a lot of patriotic, motivated people there. That was a great time, and I really enjoyed it. And I was glad to have you there as well. So, Clark, part of this podcast is about transitioning into civilian life, right? So we have, I don't know, about 15 or 20 minutes left. And
Okay.
it when you transitioned from, and we could have you on another podcast and we could, you know,
Oh, we can do that now.
hear other stories too, because I mean, there's no shortage of content and really, really high quality, good content. I mean, with the way that your brain works and the memories that you have. But I think for the listeners, and maybe from a historical perspective too, you know, times are different today than they were back then. And, you know, so can you describe what it's like for you coming back? And before I even, well, I'll save that for later, but why don't you describe
Well,
that?
yeah,
And yeah, and, you know,
we can do that.
yeah.
And initially, it was funny. I ended up coming home when I was completely unexpected, and I flew. I ended up on a flight back across the country that must have stopped at every airport between between San Francisco and Newark, New Jersey. And the pilot, the guy, the captain, I ended up talking with him, and I actually sat in the jump seat for most of the flight with him and BS'd about airplanes and stuff. And whenever we land someplace, he'd let me get off the airplane and quick try to run and call somebody on the phone to tell them I was coming. And it never worked until I actually got to Newark. So I got to Newark and I found a phone and I called. I didn't remember my home phone number, but I remembered my aunt and uncle's number. So I called that. She called my aunt Edith, called my mom, and said I was, down in the airport in Newark. So I'm standing there. I got my bags and all of that, and some ding dong with long hair and in white robes decides this is his big opportunity to bust my. And I told the guy, I said, look, man, go away. You're the baby killers and blah, 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 this and that. And I said, look, just do me a favor, just go away. And he was persistent. And at that point, I had him by the throat. And I was about to turn his lights out. And I cocked my fist, and a hand reaches over my shoulder and grabs my fist and says, don't do it, son. Let me. And it was a Port Authority police officer. And he grabs this idiot by the ear and drags him outside, kicks him in the seat of the pants a couple of times, and shoves him. And that was the end of it. He comes back in. He looks at me and he goes, boy, I enjoyed doing that. And I looked at him and I said, oh, okay. I said, well, you need to know that my family has been in the law enforcement business now for about 70 years, starting with my grandfather. It's been over 100 now. And we talked to that and everything. And we finally, he says, you got anybody coming to get you? And I said, I think so. And he looks at me and he said, well, I think she's here. And I turned around and there was my mom. And was so funny. She was so nervous and so happy. And got the big hug and the kiss and all that and everything else. And I talked to the Port Authority police officer a little longer and that, and then we decided it's time to go. So I've got my duffel bag and I've got a big suitcase. So my mom says, let me try to help you, let me help you with those. And she grabs the duffel bag and she can't pick it up. So, okay. So then she figures, well, maybe the suitcase. She grabbed the suitcase. She couldn't pick that up. And I said, don't worry about it, Mom. And I picked them both up and away we went. And she just looked at me like, so we threw them in the car. We're leaving the airport. She was so nervous and upset. I had to make her stop the car and I drove home because there was no way that I was going to look at this and end up seeing myself on the evening news saying, man returns from Vietnam, dies in car crash, film at 11. So we went
What
to
was she so nervous about? Did
just
she
that
ever
I
say?
was there, that
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had come home, you know, and my Aunt Edith's son, my cousin George, had done the same thing 4 years earlier. So my mother and her sister were batting 1,000. Both of their sons went to Vietnam and both came home. So
No,
a lot of people
that's
weren't
good.
quite, a lot
Yeah.
of people weren't that lucky.
Well, and there weren't, there's nobody there other than your mom, right? I mean, not
Well,
sort
there's
of
my mom and dad, but
welcome.
she was the only one that was there to pick me up.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Well,
I
now,
posted I posted a thing on Facebook not too long ago, thanking everybody that was there to greet me when I came home. Uh, it's a picture of somebody delivering the single digit salute. We'll leave it at that.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's good to know that you're on Facebook too. I don't think you're on LinkedIn. You might be, but
Oh yeah, I am. I
for
am.
folk,
It's a wonderful thing. But one of the things, if you get onto LinkedIn or you get on any of those uh, job hunting things, be careful about what you're asking for, because like I've used the words data analyst many times because that's what we refer to what I do as. But there are data analysts that wouldn't know, a quart of oil from, a beer. I mean, so you got to be very careful about how you describe things and everything and what words you use. I mean, if you use the word design in anything, now all of a sudden you're a designer, you know.
yeah, right. Well, all kinds of data out there, and certainly maintenance data, or I think that's really good advice.
Yeah,
Certainly, because
you got to be very careful about that because I mean, I get things on LinkedIn almost daily for jobs that there is no way in God's green earth once I talk to these people that they would
if
go,
they only knew what would come with that package if
oh,
they hired you, Clark,
not only, I mean,
Mr. Wonderful.
well, yeah, he's a great guy. Uh, we don't need to tell them that 5 different Morton's restaurants know me as Mr. Wonderful.
So you're a fan of the steaks, right? Gotcha. And so what I was kind of poking in to a little bit, and welcome home, by the way, from all the patriotic Americans here that
Well,
were around during Vietnam and didn't get a chance to welcome
that's
you.
one of those things, the government has managed to screw things up every way to Sunday in every conflict, uh, even during World War II. But one of the things that they don't get is the president of the United States goes and says, all right, I want to intervene in this. I want to do something here. And so he goes and he asks, the DOD and all these people, what can we do? So, and he has his options and he goes to Congress and says, I want to do this. And these are the options. And Congress debates the whole thing and the House and Senate and everything, and they vote on it. Well, if they vote, whatever they vote for, that's it. Right. And that's what we're going to do. Okay. Well, but then they drop the ball because at that point, the president and all the members of Congress, whether they voted for something or against something, once you put people in the field, once you commit people to combat,
Boots on the
you are,
ground. Yeah.
you are honor bound to support them 100%, unconditionally. And that means if you voted against it, that's fine. You can vote against something. I mean, that's part of the joy of this country. We can we can have different opinions. But once it's voted on and it passes, you are now committed to support that. And you are now committed to keep the American people behind the effort and to keep the American people behind those war fighters, 100%, with no dissension ever. Or you ought to go to Leavenworth.
Right on. Right
And
on. Yeah.
they had dropped the ball. They dropped the ball in Korea. They dropped the ball in Vietnam. They dropped the ball with Desert Storm. I mean, every
So
time they've dropped the ball.
right. So let's move on to
By the way, I volunteered to speak to a joint session of Congress through my representative to explain that to them, because obviously they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, but I don't have that problem.
right. And you've got a lot of wisdom and opinion to go along with that. So I think as we round it out here, Clark, some of the stories that you've told me in the past of trying to really find employment after you came back, and it was pretty challenging from what I remember. Yeah.
One of the first things was when I was released and all that, I figured I had a job before I went in. And I figured what I would do is I would come back and I would, go back to that job and work there for a while, trying to decide what I was going to do. Well, they wouldn't hire me back. So I went to my congressman, a gentleman named Bob Rowe, who was a Democrat from New Jersey. And I said, you need to help me with this. And what I wanted either one of three things. I either wanted to be escorted there by federal marshals and told that you will employ him, whether you want to or not, it's the law. And if you don't do it, we're going to do one of two things. We're going to put you in prison, or we're going to close your business, or you've got to pay him a year's salary. And according to the wonderful Mr. Rowe, well, the war isn't very popular. And I said, let me explain something to you there, son. I said, it's less popular for the people that are actually over there prosecuting it than the people here. The people here aren't getting shot at, right? The people over there are. And it's about time you people, supported us, and I got nothing.
So you actually ended up being unemployed for some time, and then homeless too, right? Or close to homeless, like down to your last nickel or something like that.
I was living with my parents. No, that was another time. But after that, I decided I was going to go to school, and so I signed up for my VA benefits and went to school and worked part-time. And actually, I worked part-time for almost a couple of years there in the emergency room of the Barnett Hospital in Patterson. Very interesting.
Well, you did that, and then you did some police work too, didn't you? Were you?
I did that afterwards. That was another thing. But like I said,
moved up to Connecticut for a while.
My family had been in the business for a long time, so that I fell into that pretty easy. But right before you and I met, when they closed the lab, at one point there, when we were working for Bob and that, I was working part-time there. I was working part-time for Castrol doing things. I was working part-time for a store called, what do you call it?
Like Best Buy or something? No, it was Radio Shack, right? Or
no, it was, I can't think of the name of it right now. I'll think of it. But and I also worked pumping gas. I had 4 part-time jobs, and while I was, I was doing things, and then eventually when they decided they were going to move, they were going to consolidate all the all the stuff for Castrol, for Optimal and Tribal and all the rest of that and everything. I got offered a job and ended up in, you and me and a bunch of other people ended up in Illinois.
Right
So,
on. Yep. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, but
So, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead,
yeah,
Clark.
that financially that was a difficult time. But the people that ran the what do you call it the apartments where I was living were very kind, and I went to them early on and I said, look, there's going to come the first of a month where I don't have the money to pay you, and they said, don't worry about it. As long as you pay us at some point, we're good. And when I started working for Bob, then I had more money, and it ceased to be a problem. Uh, but I was working on average about 70, 75 hours a week, starting at about 6 a.m. and working till about 9 o'clock at night. And it was cool. I was actually making as much money as I was when I had one job, but I didn't have any time to spend the money. So I was actually getting rich.
Right on. It's funny how that works, right?
Yeah, yeah. But
So let us wrap up here, Clark, with any advice that you have for people transitioning, veterans transitioning out of the military, or folks that are looking to hire them. I know in our at our past employer, you've hired some Marine some
oh,
Marines, I think. Yeah.
I hired one young guy. This was a funny thing. Uh, the kid had been to Iraq in 2004, and he came in for an interview. They were going to let me hire a what do you call it, a temporary, and so I saw all the resumes and I called in a few people to make it look good, but I had already decided when I read this kid's resume where it said United States Marine Corps. I said, all right, this is the kid I'm hiring. And so at any rate, we talked to the other people, and he comes in and had the interview set for about 11:30, and me and another guy that you probably still remember, Randy Crinker, were there going to interview Scott.
Yep. Yep.
And we're there, and Scott had been a heavy machine gunner in the Marine Corps. So the first thing I did, I used to use 50 caliber ammo cans to store specimens because they're watertight. And so I took one of those and I put it in the middle of the conference room table. Didn't say a word. Scott walks in and introduces himself, and the first thing he looks at that ammo can, and he's like, he must have looked at that ammo can 5 or 6 times in a row. He's trying to figure out what the hell that ammo can's doing there. And so we're talking and everything else, and I asked him a bunch of questions about the mod deuce and this and that, the Marine Corps and all that. And finally he says to me, he says, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And he said, what the hell does any of that have to do with the job? I said, oh, nothing at all. I said, I had already decided I was going to hire you. I just have to make the offer. I said, the question at this point is whether we're going to go to lunch or not. I said, you up for lunch? And he goes, well, yeah. I said, all right, good. And Randy and I took him to this little microbrew there in Naperville. And over a few beers and lunch and everything, I made him the offer. And 3 days later, he started.
Well, it certainly helps to understand each other, and I think
Well,
Scott was lucky that you happened to be the hiring manager in that particular situation because
well, it's one of those things. If given, given a choice of 5 people, and you've got one person that served, if you think at all that they can do the job, that's the person you hire. Because as veterans, if we don't look out for one another, who's going to do it?
That's right. That's right.
That's the way it
And
goes.
that's what this podcast is about. Fortunately enough, we have a lot of patriotic folks at Mobius that that also believe
Well,
that too, and in the maintenance and reliability community, especially because I mean, you're a nice example of coming from aircraft maintenance and in making your way into oil analysis as a
yeah.
specialty, and as well as some of the other folks or most of the other folks that we've interviewed here too.
Oh, yeah.
So
And it's a wonderful, but that's, it's the same thing that I encourage people that are qualified to join the VFW, and if not, join the American Legion. Because as veterans, I mean, I don't know about anybody else. I didn't join for the benefits. I joined because my father and my cousins served, and I figured it was my turn to pay my portion of the bill. And I wanted to see if I was good enough, but it's one of those things that if we don't hang together and we don't have some strong voices in Washington, like the American Legion and the VFW, all of that stuff that we have is going to go away. And so that's up to you. That's up to us to look out for, fellow veterans, and regardless of what, when and where they served. Uh, I have a friend of mine I went to high school with, joined the Air Force, went to basic training at Lackland Air Force Base down in Texas, and then went to March Air Force Base to go to school, and he served his entire, the rest of his the rest of his 4 years at March Air Force Base, never went anywhere else.
hmm.
That's rare. But, you know, and he's somewhat apologetic because he never made it to Vietnam. I said, who cares? You could have ended up there, but it just didn't work out. The particular job that you had, you were more important at March Air Force Base than you would have been in, Benoit or Tan Son Nhut or Da Nang or Cam Ranh Bay or anywhere else. I said, but the fact of the matter is you served. And as long as somebody has stuck their right hand up and said those words, I do solemnly swear, we need to take care of one another. And
Right on, brother. Yeah. So if people want to reach out to you, you're on LinkedIn and Facebook.
oh,
So
hell yeah.
I'm not sure how many people will, but excuse me, but most of these episodes or interviews are getting a fair amount of play, thanks to Kim and the folks at Mobius here. So you might, and you're willing to talk to him, and you can
Sure.
relate, right? So Clark, I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and help us on this mission. And folks can get a hold of you. We already talked about that. Quick note to our listeners that we're seeking both women veterans as well as recently transitioned vets and Marines. We don't have any Marines yet, but our last podcast interview, Marines are the only holdout on this.
we
And I
have
know,
we have a laugh about that in my what do you call it? My VFW. We got one Marine. He's the shortest guy in the post, and he always gets his stones crushed because he's in the Marine Corps. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. But
well, it's interesting. It's a small and very dedicated, honorable group. I don't think it's smaller than the Coast Guard, though, and we have had Coast Guard. At least one person from the Coast Guard in maintenance and reliability on the show. So we're still looking for Marines, certainly females, and recently transitioned vets to give guidance. But really, Clark, your
I got to say one
voice.
more thing
Yeah, go ahead,
we
buddy.
end. Uh, I ended up in the hospital twice when I was in Vietnam, and I remember the second time that I was in there after I had the machine gun blow up in my face. I was there, and I was there for about a week and a half. And as far as I'm concerned, and in my not so humble opinion, the worst job that you could have had in Vietnam is to be a nurse. To have to stand there over some guy who's all busted up and shot up and everything, and hold his hand when he says to you, please, ma'am, don't let me die alone.
Hmm.
Or if he says to you, or he says to her, ma'am, would you please tell my mother I loved her? If that doesn't tear your heart out, you don't have one. And those women did that day in, day out. And I mean, if I could do it, I'd hand every one of them a check for $1 million. I mean, they're just tremendous people. And
Angels of Mercy, right?
oh, they're just,
Yeah.
and that job. And I remember the one nurse, Maria, and she took me to the beach the one day when I still couldn't see. And
So just for the listeners, you had, was it the ammo box or the machine gun blew up in your face? You had,
blew up, and my head was bandaged up because they didn't, the cornea had to heal and all
but
that.
you had bits, you had stuff in your eyeballs, right? That had to be picked out, like gunpowder
that was
and all this. Yeah.
I had a very nice nurse sit across from me, and I was having a lot of trouble keeping my eyes open while they were picking the pieces out. And she sat across from me, and she took my hands, and she looked at me, and she said, just look in my eyes. She said, don't look at anything else, just look in my eyes. And she sat there for an hour and looked at me and smiled at me and everything. And and every time I closed my eyes, she said, no, come on. It'll be all right. Don't worry about a thing. And she sat there for an hour and did that, when I'm sure she had a lot of other things to do. But she sat there like that. And I mean, I appreciated that to no end. But when I ended up in the hospital up in Cameron Bay, the nurse there that took care of me most of the time was a Puerto Rican girl from Brooklyn named Maria. I sang the song from West Side Story to her, and it was. But she said to me, she said, she said, if you go by the nurses' quarters at night, she says, you'll invariably hear some people crying, and she says, that's us. She said, we'll never cry in front of you guys, ever. Just, I was told that my first 3 days in country. You never cry in front of the guys, ever. It just is not done. And I can't think of a tougher job than the job they had. And boy, if I could do it, I would thank each and every one of them. I mean,
well, let's say cheers to the military nurses out there, because I'm sure there will be some that will listen to the podcast and and appreciate it for what it is, Clark. So I apologize. My dog is barking in the background. Maybe we can
time to go for a walk.
Yeah, maybe we can filter that out later. But thank you, Clark, and thank you, Mobius, for providing this platform to help both transitioning vets as well as those looking to hire them in the field of maintenance and reliability. It's been a distinct pleasure and honor, Clark, to talk to you today, as I am lucky enough to get to do that on a fairly regular basis as we hang out together.
Out with another vet tonight. What do you call it's coming down? Ronnie Lemke.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
He was in the Navy during Desert Storm.
Well, tell Ronnie I said hello. He also worked at Castrol with us, and is a great guy. So, thank you, Clark.
He's in the Navy now.
His boys are. It's a family business, or so we've heard.
They're involved in nuclear submarines.
Oh, better them than me. Yeah.
Both of them went to nuke school.
I like being in the water, but I like being outside the submarine in the water.
You like to keep the window open, huh?
Yeah, that's right. I'll clean off the windows for him.
There you go.
So Flipper can wave on the way by. But all right, brother. Well, thank you. This wraps it up for this one, and season 2, episode 2 is a wrap. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Veterans Connected. We will see you back for another episode very soon. In between, we hope to see you in the Veterans Connected community group, where you can meet Eric and fellow podcast guests and share with other industry veterans at MobiusConnect.com. And we hope to see you there.